and good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Insight APSAD webinar. I am Beck Mounsey from Dovetail, which is the youth-focused service within the Insight team. So we provide training and education for workers who work with young people across Queensland around their alcohol and other drug use. And since 2021, vaping has been our most called about and asked about topic. So we're really excited for today's webinar, Vape Chemistry, Decoding the Cloud. Before we get into it though, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land in which this event takes place. So I'm coming from Meanjin, Brisbane, so the land of the Yagara and Turrbal people, and I'd like to pay my respect to elders past and present. And also extend that to the lands in which you are all coming from today in other parts of Queensland and also around Australia. Before we get into it, just quickly, if you have any questions today, please pop them in the chat and these will come through to us as hosts and I'll collate them and we will get through to them at the end. And also, if you're having any technical difficulties, just send through a message and we'll do our best to help you out. But it's now my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jody Moller, who is doing our presentation today. So Jody is a senior lecturer at the School of Chemistry and Molecular Bioscience at the University of Wollongong. So she graduated with a PhD in medicinal and organic chemistry in 2003 and has been working as a chemical toxicologist since 2017. So Jody, along with her research collaborator, Dr. Celine Kelso, are the leading experts in chemical analysis of vaping products in Australia. And in collaboration with New South Wales Health, they have analysed over 1,200 vaping products to date. So this research has led to significant contributions to federal and also New South Wales state vaping policy. And Jody's research has also been featured really heavily lately in the media with highlights including a BBC documentary on vaping, and also Jody's made appearances on ABC News and A Current Affair. So I first had the pleasure of meeting Jody about just over a year ago now at a 2-day vaping working group here in Brisbane, and I was just blown away by the research she's doing and I just found it absolutely fascinating. So I've been really excited to get Jody here to do a webinar for us. So in her presentation today, she's going to share with us her findings that her and Celine have been working on in the lab. About the analysis of vapes, what they're finding, particularly from vapes that have been seized from young people or taken from young people in schools, and then also how the new regulatory landscape in Australia, how that's influencing the vape market in Australia. So without any further delay, I'll pass over to you, Jody, and we'll go from there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Beck, for that lovely introduction. And before I start, I'd just like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am on, which is the Turrbal people. All right, so I've got a lot that I want to get to, so I'm actually going to get straight into it. It's not working. There we go. So obviously I'm not going to focus on a lot of the background. I'm sure a lot of you are aware we've seen a massive increase in vaping amongst everybody, but particularly amongst young people in Australia. If we look at the latest data, about 40% of people using e-cigarettes from the National Drug Strategy Household Survey are under the age of 25, about 60% are under the age of 30. So we've obviously seen a huge increase since 2019, largely due to the introduction of disposable e-cigarettes in Australia. We're obviously in this really interesting landscape in the vaping space at the moment because of the changes to legislation. So you may or may not be aware that in October 2021, the first set of significant legislation came into place around e-cigarettes. Australia is the only country in the world which requires a prescription for the possession of a nicotine-containing e-cigarette. And in October 2021, the regulation stated that you had to get a prescription. You could access it via a pharmacy, or you could import a 3-month supply from overseas. There's also some packaging and labelling requirements. But the most important part of the legislation for that October 2021 change was that all of the legislative regulations applied to nicotine-containing e-cigarettes e-cigarettes, but they did not apply to nicotine-free products. Any product that didn't contain nicotine was still able to be legally sold over the counter anywhere in Australia without the requirement for a prescription. As long as you were over the age of 18, you could purchase those legally. So obviously that has led to some significant issues in availability of these products, and we'll get to what we've seen in regards to that a little bit later. Obviously, there is a whole slew of new regulations that are going to be coming into place across 2024. So in January, they introduced the ban on disposable devices. In March this year, we had the removal of the importation scheme. So you can now only access nicotine-containing vapes via a pharmacy. They have started limiting the products to tobacco, mint, and menthol only. The nicotine-free vapes are now included in the same regulation, and all of this is in a bill which is currently still passing through federal parliament at the moment. This month, the new TGO is meant to be announced. We have not got that information yet, and by the end of this year, we're going to see some additional things like plain packaging requirements and ingredient restrictions. Now, all of these regulations are only going to apply to products that are purchased legally via a pharmacy. If the black market proliferates, then none of those requirements are obviously going to apply to black market products. All right, so who am I and what do we do in the vaping space? So it's probably a little unusual to have someone like myself speaking to all of you because I am a chemist. I have worked as a chemist for a very, very long time. But what we do is we look at the chemical components of e-cigarette products. We can analyze the liquid and we can analyze the vapor. We have a very, very nice in-house design system that allows us to vape an e-cigarette, capture the vapor, and have a look what is in them. We can tell what's in them, how much is in them, and then we can use that to do some sort of analysis on whether anything that is toxic is present at a concentration that is likely to cause harm. And down the bottom, we just have a bit of an image of a chromatogram of the type of thing we see when we use our instrument. So we separate out each of those peaks is a different chemical that is present in a sample. I'm not going to focus on this, but it's here if you want to refer to the slides. All of the analysis that I'm going to be talking about today is analysis on e-liquids, not on vapor. So this is just extracting the e-liquid directly out of a device. Almost all of these devices are disposables. So we crack them open, we extract the liquid, and we analyze what's in it. All right, so the main study that I'm going to be talking about today is a study that was in collaboration with New South Wales Health. And the teachers in New South Wales schools were collecting vapes off students when they caught students vaping at school. So this is high schools specifically in New South Wales. And then they provided those vapes directly to us for analysis. So this is the first study in Australia that involved the direct analysis of school samples to work out what is actually in them, how many of them contained nicotine, what type of samples and products are young people actually using. So we had about 597 samples collected from 18 high schools across New South Wales. 2 of those were urban in Sydney, 2 of them were regional. 2 of the health districts were regional, 2 of the health districts were urban. And these were collected across late 2022, early 2023. So that is between the 2021 changes and those new changes that were announced this year. Okay, so all of these samples are sort of sitting across what was that previous regulatory landscape. First thing that we found, which probably is not going to surprise any of you, it didn't really surprise us, was that almost all of the samples were fruit flavored. So more than 85% of those 500 and something e-cigarettes were fruit flavored samples. Oh, and I will say that of the 597, 593 of them were disposable. So virtually every single sample that was confiscated from a school student was a disposable e-cigarette device. Once again, not really surprising. We knew that disposables were flooding the market. There were 4 refillable devices, however, in this study. So fruit flavors overwhelmingly dominant. There were a very, very small number of tobacco and mint flavors, but as was to be expected, fruit, beverage, candy, dessert dominated the market. If we broke it down by brand and model, we found overwhelmingly that there were about 4 brands that kind of once again dominated the landscape in this space. So over 63% of samples were from one brand, and that was iGet, and over a quarter of all samples were one brand and one model, and that was the iGet bar, which is this one that I've got shown on the screen down here. And I'm sure you're aware the iGet bar is exceedingly popular among young people. So really dominating the market. There were a large number of different brands across the whole sample, but really dominated by a very small number of different products. And all of this, I will say, all this data is available in preprint form at the moment. The link, the reference is just at the bottom of the page. All right, so that was just looking broadly at what we had in our sample set. We then wanted to do some chemical analysis because we're chemists and that's what we do. So we wanted to crack these open and actually look what was in them. So we didn't analyze all 600 of them. We analyzed 407 of the devices. And so what I'm going to go through now is what we found and think a little bit about what the possible issues are with the different chemical classes that we find in e-cigarettes. So the first thing, and what the majority of the e-cigarette liquid is made of, is propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin. So these are our 2 carrier fluids. They're the solvent that dissolves everything else. They're also the compounds that physically make the cloud that you see. So that cloud is actually tiny suspended droplets of propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin in the air. So these were found in all of the samples. Are they dangerous? Not really. So propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin have very, very low acute toxicity across any kind of exposure route. However, when we heat up propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin, they can break down. So they can undergo what's called a pyrolysis reaction. So they basically chemically change into a new compound when they get heated. And the compounds that are formed during that process are known as volatile aldehydes. They're compounds like formaldehyde and acetaldehyde. These compounds are present in the vapor of these e-cigarettes. We don't see them in the liquid analysis, but they are present once it transfers into the vapor. But they're present at concentrations that are much, much lower than in cigarette smoke. Not good for you, but still less harmful for you than cigarette smoke would be. The next thing that we find in our e-cigarettes is obviously nicotine. So there are 2 main forms of nicotine that we see in e-cigarette products. Free-base nicotine, which is the neutral or basic form of nicotine, where both of our nitrogens here don't have a charge on them. That is what we saw when we first started looking at e-cigarette products. I started analyzing e-cigarettes back in 2019. So originally, when we first started working in this area, every product that we analyzed had nicotine in the free-base form. Nicotine as a free base, once you get to concentrations above about 12 milligrams per mil, starts to have a really harsh burning sensation on the back of the throat. Once the concentrations get up above 20 milligrams per mil, even highly experienced smokers find that the concentration is too high and causes too much irritation to their throat. So free-base nicotine has basically disappeared from the market because Juul realized that if they could add acid in to their nicotine, they could convert nicotine over to the nicotine salt. So what we get here is a protonated form of nicotine where we get an extra hydrogen added on here with a positive charge. And that changes the pH of the e-liquid, and it means that they can get much higher concentrations of nicotine into the sample without causing that harsh burning sensation on the back of the throat. So we went from having an average nicotine concentration in an e-cigarette product of about 6 to 12 milligrams per mil. And when Juul hit the market, Juul pushed the nicotine concentration up to 59 milligrams per mil. So that was a huge increase in nicotine concentration. So we wanted to look at what's in these disposables. What type of nicotine is it? Is it free base? Is it salt? What's the concentration? So first of all, nicotine was detected in 97.3% of the samples that we analysed. So virtually every product contained nicotine. And remember, these are products that have been used by young people. All of the samples that did contain nicotine contained it as the benzoic acid salt. So they're all using nicotine in its salt form. and that allows them to get high concentrations of nicotine in there without causing harsh irritation to the throat. So the average concentration was about 40 milligrams per mil, so that is quite high. And interestingly, we found that there were devices that appeared completely identical. So the two gun pod devices that we've got here that are both Cola Ice, there's absolutely nothing different between these two devices visually to inspect them. One contained nicotine and one did not. So the ones that were nicotine free, there was nothing that we could look at or see that allowed us to distinguish those from ones that did contain nicotine. So there's nothing obvious. You can't pick it by looking at it. You certainly couldn't walk into a store and go, that product has nicotine, this product doesn't. There's nothing to visually distinguish them. You need to analyze them in a laboratory to make that distinction. We know nicotine is toxic via oral exposure. We know it has caused deaths in the past. And obviously, we don't want products getting out on the market that contain nicotine that don't have appropriate warnings on them about the toxicity of nicotine. Just quickly to put it back into context against cigarettes. So one I Get bar has 3,500 puffs in it. And that, if we consider how much of a cigarette burns away the nicotine, how much you're actually absorbing, works out to be 12 to 16 packets worth of nicotine. So that's just a pure nicotine comparison. We're not comparing anything else. We're not comparing how often people use them or anything, just from nicotine. It's about the equivalent of 12 to 16 packets worth of nicotine in one I Get bar. And then similarly, if we actually look at plasma levels to compare how much nicotine we're expecting to get someone to get into their bloodstream compared to how much gets in from cigarette smoke. So this study looked at a couple of different concentrations, so a 35 milligram per mil and a 50 milligram per mil samples compared to cigarettes. So a cigarette is in the grey dots here. You can see it is the lowest of all of the samples. The 35 milligram per mil are these, the navy and the orange. The other four are our 50 milligram per mil samples. All of them have significantly higher plasma concentrations of nicotine than the equivalent smoking. So we know that these nicotine salt products are able to get a lot of nicotine into the bloodstream of these users. All right, our next chemical is obviously going to be flavoring molecules. So I've only got two shown here. There are lots and lots and lots of available flavoring molecules that we could potentially find in these samples. Our method analyzes for 39 different possible flavoring molecules that we can actually quantify. We found 29 out of those 39 in these samples, so a really wide variety. The most common flavors, really interestingly, in this sample set were 1,3-diacetyl and 1,2-diacetyl. So these two compounds are known to have a buttery flavor. Interestingly, they're actually present in a lot of fruit flavored samples, and we do not know why we're finding this compound being so prevalent in these e-cigarette samples. We suspect it might have something to do with mouthfeel rather than flavor, because it's appearing in flavors that we would not expect a buttery flavor to be appearing in. Our next most common were vanillin, which is obviously vanilla flavor, and ethyl maltol, which is just a sweetener. Most of the flavor concentrations are at quite low, the flavor molecules are at quite low concentration. So generally below 2 milligrams per mil. 1,3-diacetyl is a bit of an exception there. It had an average of 11.8 milligrams per mil, but really concerningly, we detected it in one sample at concentrations over 100 milligrams per mil. And in toxicology, dose makes the poison. So we're really concerned that some of these flavoring molecules are being added in such high concentrations in some of these samples. General toxicity of these compounds, we know they're all safe via ingestion. There's very little information on their inhalational toxicity. And we do have a subset of flavors that are banned under the TGO 110, and we'll get to those in just a second. Our next class of chemicals that we have in our e-cigarette products are coolants. Now, coolants are quite unique. Coolants did not exist in e-cigarette products 4 years ago. We didn't see them at all. This is a really recent addition into the e-cigarette space, and they've really only been added since we've seen this transition over to disposable e-cigarette devices. So a coolant is a chemical compound which doesn't impart any flavor Okay, so there's no minty taste. There's nothing else, no flavor associated with it at all. All it does is make your mouth and your throat feel cold when you inhale. Now, we know a lot of these products are labeled up as ice. The one I've got on the screen here is called blueberry ice. So we sort of said, okay, well, maybe these coolants are being added as the ice sensation that they get in these compounds, in these products, sorry. But only about fewer than 50% contained ice or freeze or any kind of reference to cold in the name of the product. And 99.7% of the samples, so that was actually every sample except one, contained a coolant molecule. And interestingly, the one that didn't contain a coolant was a tobacco flavor, not any of the fruit flavors. So this WS23, which is this main cooling agent that we're seeing, is present in pretty much every disposable sample that we have analyzed for the past few years. Once again, it's a bit of a mystery as to why it is suddenly become so prevalent, but we suspect that the reason it may be present is to mask that burn. So even as a nicotine salt, there is still a bit of a burning sensation on the back of the throat, particularly if you're a naive user. If you haven't vaped before, when you inhale a high concentration of nicotine, you will get a burning sensation in your throat. We suspect that this cooling agent may be being added to mask that burning sensation, to allow them to get higher concentrations of nicotine so naive users are able to vape high concentrations. All right. So one of the other things we looked at in this study was we analyzed the banned compounds. So there are 8 compounds that are banned at the moment under the current version of the TGO 110. So this is the version that was brought in 2021. So in this study, of the 407 e-cigarette samples that we chemically analyzed, 14 of them contained at least one compound that is banned in Australia. So that's 3.4% of the samples contained something that was banned in Australia. The first 3 of the banned compounds that we identified are all flavoring molecules. So acetone is a compound that can cause lung damage. When it heats up, it can generate diacetyl. Diacetyl is another banned compound. That's the one that is associated with popcorn lung. That's why that has been banned in Australia. So that was found in 2 samples. Benzaldehyde is a compound that is harmful if inhaled. It was found in 3 samples. That is actually, we've found that it seems to be common in a lot of cola flavored vapes. It's obviously something that they're using to replicate the cola flavor. And it does seem to largely be prevalent in cola flavored e-cigarettes. Cinnamaldehyde, as the name suggests, is cinnamon flavor, and it causes mitochondrial dysfunction. We found that in 5 samples, but obviously the most concerning thing that we found in here was ethylene glycol. So ethylene glycol is the major component in antifreeze. It is the reason that antifreeze is so toxic. Antifreeze via oral ingestion causes significant renal toxicity and can lead to death. So we found ethylene glycol in 4 samples. I have been a big advocate over the last few years of saying, when someone said to me, oh, there's antifreeze in vapes, I would turn around and go, actually, no, they contain propylene glycol. Propylene glycol is found in some antifreeze products, but it isn't toxic. It's fine. Because we had never found ethylene glycol in a product in Australia. That changed as part of this study. So we found this in 4 samples, and we did not find this at really, really low, irrelevant concentrations. We found this at concentrations up to 11 milligrams per mil. So this was easily detectable high concentrations with potential to cause harm in these products. So this is obviously a massive concern. And once again, it does seem to be that some of these disposable products don't have the same manufacturing requirements that we would like to see in e-cigarette samples in Australia. And as a consequence, we're getting contamination during the production process with some really dangerous compounds making their way through into these products. All right, so what we've talked about so far, with the exception of the banned compounds that we just went through, is kind of the intended content. Yeah, so what did they mean to put in? They put in the carrier fluids, the nicotine, the flavors, the coolants, and that's what's supposed to be in there. But obviously, there can be unintended content as well. So we just went through some of those contaminants like ethylene glycol. We can also have potentially have vitamin E acetate. That's what was involved in Avali in the United States, which was a cannabis oil contaminant. I have never seen it in an e-cigarette. I don't think it would be there. It's not miscible with the propylene glycol and the vegetable glycerin. It would form two layers like oil and water. So there wouldn't really be any point in it being there. But it is one of the banned substances in Australia. Probably the thing I personally am the most concerned about in e-cigarettes is metals. So this is something that we know from studies overseas, that we do get some leaching of metals from the coil, from the solder into the e-liquid, and that those metals are able to then transfer into the vapor. We have seen heavy metals like chromium, nickel, and lead present in both the e-liquid and the vapor. So our methods that we have at Wollongong, so the current method that we use to do our analysis, is not able to detect metals. We are right now, I have a student who commenced this year who is in the process of developing a novel method for us so that we can do some analysis to look at these metals. And I'll explain a little bit later on exactly why we are really focusing in on metals at the moment. Hopefully it will make sense before I get to the end. So once again, the metals generally are still at lower concentrations than they are in cigarette smoke, but they do appear to be higher in disposables than they are in our traditional refillable e-cigarettes. So once again, this comes back to the quality of manufacturing processes for some of these products. And you may have seen in the media a report about a urine analysis recently that found uranium in people that were vaping at vaping a lot and particular flavors compared to vaping other flavors. It was a bit of an unusual study. Honestly, the uranium levels were pretty similar to what we see across the general population, so I don't really think there was much to it. But some of these products, particularly the lead and the nickel and the chromium, are things we're very concerned about. The final type of unintended content that we know is in there is what we call adducts, and we published on this last year. So adducts are basically compounds that are being formed in the e-liquid. So there's chemical reactions occurring when they mix all of the products into the e-liquid. A chemical reaction can occur and we can make new products that were not intended to be there. So in this particular example, we have vanillin, which is the bit in the purple, reacting with propylene glycol, which is the bit in the blue. And when they come together, they form a new compound. We're worried about this because some preliminary cell studies have shown that these adducts appear to be more toxic than the parent compound. So this compound is more toxic than either vanillin or PG. So when we put it together, we are making some new compound that has increased toxicity. We don't know how many of these are forming. We don't know how long they're staying in the vapor, and we don't know how long they're persisting once they enter the body. So lots of research still to be done in that area. All right. So once we were done with our chemical analysis, we sat down and we thought about considering everything we looked at, what were really the most concerning things that we found. And there were some unusual aspects in this study of identifying things that we were not expecting to find. So we knew we'd find nicotine, we knew we'd find the flavoring molecules, but what did we find that we weren't necessarily expecting to find? Well, the first one was that young people are tampering with their devices extensively. So we had a look through every device that we were given, and almost a quarter of the devices had previously been opened before they were confiscated by the teacher. So we can identify that either by tooling marks around the edges where they'd clearly been pried open, some weren't put back together, and some, when we opened them up, the components were actually in the complete wrong order inside. So we could clearly tell that they'd been opened and rearranged. So why are young people opening these up? Well, the obvious reason is vapes are expensive, particularly if you're young and you don't have access to a lot of money. So they're potentially refilling the devices. And really concerningly, they're also likely trying to recharge the batteries. Now, in these older style devices, like the iGet bar, which was our most common one in this study, this iGet bar does not have a charging port. There's no facility by which you can easily recharge it. The way the battery in this has to be recharged is you have to actually the way that it's recommended on YouTube is that people strip off wires from a phone charger. They separate out the wires, they attach those wires to the appropriate wires inside the e-cigarette, and they are able to recharge the battery. That is obviously an exceedingly dangerous practice. Lithium-ion batteries are renowned for exploding. They vent with flame when they get overcharged, if they don't have appropriate chips in there to control control the voltage input into those devices. And I can tell you right now, a lot of these cheap disposable devices do not have those chips on them. So we really do not want to see young people being harmed by trying to recharge these batteries that are not designed to be recharged. Obviously, risks by nicotine exposure because they're opening up a device that contains nicotine, potential battery explosion. And then also, they're going to be pushing these devices beyond the lifespan that they were intended for. So when you have a disposable device, your device comes with one coil in it. That coil is designed for however many puffs that particular device has. So for an iGet bar, that's 3,500 puffs. So that's 3,500 heating and cooling cycles that coil is going to undergo. If you refill that device and you recharge that device, you're pushing that coil beyond the level that it was designed for. So you're potentially pushing it out, to 4,000, 5,000 puffs. We don't know what effect that is having on that metal leaching that we were talking about earlier. So if these people are extending the use of these devices, what is actually happening in that metal space? So that's something we're really interested in at looking at. The other thing that we found, because these devices were used by students, we actually were able to see the condition of the coils when we opened them up. So on the top here, you can see what the main 3 styles of coils look like when they're new. So we have what we refer to as a vertical coil, a horizontal coil, and a mesh coil. So they're the 3 main types of coil that we see in a disposable e-cigarette device. These are the same 3 types of coils in a device that has been used by a young person that we opened up and we found it in really poor condition. And what we see for these is we see significant blackening of the wick surrounding the coil. And in some cases, as you can kind of see here on our mesh coil example, we can see some degradation of the metal. So we can actually see some of the metal is starting to disappear, or it's actually getting lots of charcoal embedded on it as well. So we really are very, very concerned about the way in which young people are using these. So we've actually analysed a lot of e-cigarettes before that were used devices. So we've had a lot of samples submitted to us from local people around the Wollongong area and this is generally people in their 20s who have finished with their device and they submit it to our lab for analysis. While we did see blackening of those devices, it wasn't as terrible as it was amongst this school cohort. So that possibly suggests a few things. It suggests, one, maybe young people aren't aware as much of when the e-liquid is starting to taste bad, that possibly they should not be continuing with vaping. If there's any kind of burning flavor to it, they should definitely stop because that's likely to have increased pyrolysis products, which could cause them harm. 2, maybe they don't care that it tastes bad for one particular sample because once again, they're short on money. They can't afford another vape. So they're going to continue to use that vape anyway. Or 3, the ones that we were analysing were ones that had been refilled and therefore had extended them further past their lifespan. And that's why we saw the extensive blackening that we were seeing in some of these products. The other thing we've seen over the past couple of years is an increase in the size of disposable devices. So if we think back to just a few years ago, these one particular examples, I've just picked one brand and I've looked at the transition across that brand. So I've picked iGet. So we saw the original sort of iGets were about 600 puffs. And over time, they have gradually increased. We can push up to the iGet bar, which was our popular one in this particular study. That has 3,500 puffs. And then we can keep going past the goat and all the way up to iGet's newest product, which is available on the market at the moment. And this has been confiscated off school students recently in New South Wales and provided to us. It was not part of this study because was not available when this study was completed, but we've seen it recently in samples. And this product is a 7,000 puff device. So it has twice the capacity of the iGet bar. This particular sample does have a charging port. Okay, so it is able to be plugged in and recharged without the risk of accidental exposure to nicotine or to the battery exploding. So that's good, but you have one coil in this device that is now being used for 7,000 puffs. So this comes back to our concern about what is happening across the lifespan of some of these disposable devices. If you have a pod device, every time you change the pod, you change the coil. Okay, so that coil changes out quite regularly. If you have a refillable device, you regularly change the coil in that device. So the only ones where the coil is staying in there for an extended period of time are these disposable style devices. All right. So that's some of the things we found. For the next sort of part of the talk, I really want to focus on, for the last kind of part, how the market changed in response to the 2021 changes, how we've seen it already changing in response to the recent announcements, and what we think might happen moving forward into the new regulation, what the market is going to look like. All right, so first of all, how did it change in response to the 2021 changes? So I'm sure you'll remember me saying at the start that the biggest thing with the 2021 change was that nicotine-free e-cigarettes were allowed to be sold over the counter, but nicotine-containing e-cigarettes required a prescription. So perhaps it was not surprising that the main thing we saw in response to that change was the removal of the word nicotine from packaging of products that did, in fact, contain nicotine. So these are not from the school study. I will need to make that clear. These samples are from a separate study, also with New South Wales Health, where we were looking at seized samples. The reason they're not from the school study is the school study samples don't have packaging because they come just as the e-cigarette, exactly the way they get confiscated from the student. To do this study, we needed to actually have devices that came with their packaging so that we could have a look at what was on there. So what we found was that prior to the announcement of the fact that there was going to be a prescription requirement for nicotine-containing products, most e-cigarettes in Australia contained some kind of warning that said this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is addictive. They generally had a concentration. They generally had nicotine listed in the ingredients list, if there was one on the back. In July 2021, the government announced the forthcoming changes for the October. By August, we already had seen that the market had shifted to remove nicotine from the packaging. So the word nicotine completely disappeared. We ended up with and the 5% went away. We got a 5 ml instead of the 5%. Nicotine disappeared off the ingredients list. This was a really, really rapid change for these companies to modify their packaging specifically to hit the Australian market. We have seen some that come with a 21 warning, not an 18 warning, and some that just say a generic not for sale to minors. So they are producing packaging that can be sold in multiple jurisdictions, but this was clearly a change specifically targeting us. We extended this analysis and we looked at any product that had a manufactured date on it. And I'll be honest, most e-cigarette products, the disposables, do not tell you when they were manufactured. So across about 400 or 500 samples, we had 78 that actually had a date on the box. When we analysed those by the date that they were manufactured, we can see that, so in the blue on this graph, that is something that mentioned nicotine. Green is there was no mention of nicotine. And by January of 2022, that's when we saw the last mention of nicotine on a packet of one of these disposables. So by February 2022, all mention of nicotine was completely gone. So what that meant was that makes it exceedingly difficult for people, seizure teams to go in and know if a particular device has nicotine in it or not, because it has to be analysed chemically in a laboratory to work out if it does. So these changes were very, very rapid. And once again, this data is available in a preprint. Once again, the info is at the bottom of the slide if you'd like to have a look. All right, so that was the 2021 changes. What have we seen more recently? So in May of last year, the Federal Health Minister announced that there was going to be a ban on disposables in Australia. And I mentioned that in this study, the iGet bar was our most popular device that we saw used among young people. In about June of last year, a new device appeared on the Australian market. It is called the iGet Bar Plus, and it is not a disposable. It is actually a pod style device. So this bottom part of the iGet Bar Plus contains the battery. It is rechargeable. You can plug it in. This top part that kind of looks like a lid pulls out. That is the pod that contains the e-liquid and the coil. So these have an exchangeable coil system. They can be changed over. You will notice these devices are a little bit larger. They're about 6,000 puffs, but they clearly shifted from a disposable over to a pod device. And this happened almost immediately when the disposable ban was announced in Australia. So once again, really, really quick shift from the market. Recently, I have noticed there is a different version of the iGet Bar Plus available in New Zealand. And you can see these are two products that are very, very similar. They both take exactly the same style of pod. So the pods between them can be exchanged. The difference is that the New Zealand version has this unusual little black handle on the side of it. That is a child-safe lock because New Zealand has recently introduced a requirement that all devices have to have a child safety lock on them. So the iGet Bar Plus, once again, iGet have modified their product to fit a particular market. And these ones are not really available in Australia at the moment, but they are available very, very widely in New Zealand. So they use the same pods. It just has a slightly different device that allows for child safety, a child safety switch to be added on. So are disposables still available in Australia? Well, obviously at the moment, there haven't been any really good studies performed because this only happened earlier in the year. But from anecdotal reports, and I'm sure a lot of you particularly those of you who are interacting with young people, are aware that most vapers report that they're not having too much difficulty currently still getting hold of disposable devices in Australia. There has, however, been an increase in cost. So some of the providers have bumped the price up, but they don't appear at the moment to be too difficult to get a hold of. We have heard reports that some importers are able to pay insurance to the manufacturer, and that guarantees that the products are going to make it through the border. And if they don't make it through the border, they will send another batch of that product across. So that's partially perhaps explains the price increase. So the people that are bringing these in to sell are adding an insurance cost on that guarantees them entry into the country. Around where I am in Wollongong, we've seen the appearance of a number of American candy stores. And these are stores that have opened this year since the disposable ban has come in. They sell American candy. They also sell tobacco products. And we know they're also illegally selling vaping products. The particular one shown in that image in Bulli is directly opposite a primary school. So there's a primary school straight across the road from where that shop has just opened. We have also, as I'm sure you are aware, seen the rise of nicotine pouches. So these are like an updated version of snus, which is a tobacco leaf product. These nicotine pouches contain either synthetic nicotine or a nicotine that has been extracted out of tobacco, but they don't contain the tobacco leaf itself. It's just the nicotine and flavors basically embedded onto a cellulose space. They're a small pouch. They get placed between the lip and the gum. You absorb the nicotine through the mucosal membrane. And we know that there's been a lot of social media push around these types of products. And we've also heard a lot of reports about use in the fitness industry. Really strangely, a lot of young people seem to be utilizing them as a stimulant in the gym. Obviously, it's not socially acceptable to smoke or vape inside a gymnasium, but they feel that they're able to use these nicotine pouches whilst they're working out. There are a whole range of different brands and models that have hit the market in this space, including some that are owned by large tobacco, some of the big tobacco companies. What we're the most concerned about in this space is the huge variety of concentrations that you get and the lack of consistency in the labeling. So for example, Killer over here with the skull on it is labeled as an extra strong product. It has 11.2 milligrams of nicotine in each pouch. Our 77 raspberry is labeled as medium strength and it has 10 milligrams per mil. So they're virtually exactly the same concentration. One is extra strong, one is labeled as medium. The mega strong version of the 77 actually has 25 milligrams of nicotine in each pouch and is labeled on the front as 50 milligrams. That's because it's 50 milligrams per gram, not 50 milligrams per pouch. The Zen products, in contrast, the 6 milligrams there is a milligram per pouch, not a milligram per gram. So there's no consistency in the labeling of these products. So if you're switching around between brands, you're going to find it very difficult to know exactly how much nicotine you're using. Obviously, they contain nicotine. There's a risk of dependence. They're toxic at high doses. We have reports that they can cause significant gum irritation, particularly if the nicotine is at high concentrations, and they can cause ulceration of the gum as well. They may contain nitrosamines, which are carcinogenic if the nicotine has been extracted from tobacco. They're definitely a decreased harm compared to smoking, very likely to be a decreased harm compared to vaping, as they won't contain any of the metals, they won't contain any of the formaldehydes or acetaldehydes that we get during the heating process. But obviously, still potentially dependence forming. We've also seen these nicotine pearls appear on the market. So these are similar to pouches, but the pouches, you just absorb the nicotine out of them. The pouch itself doesn't dissolve. These Nico Pops, the whole thing dissolves. You put them under your tongue, the whole thing dissolves and you absorb the nicotine from those. These haven't hit the market quite as broadly as the pouches yet, but they may be on the way. All right, final little part of what I want to do before I wrap up, I've got a bit longer than I wanted to give some time for questions, is to think about how the market's going to change moving forward. I'm sure you're all aware of stealth and zero vaping, which is trying to vape without producing any vapor. We've seen this new product from iGet, which is really, really tiny. It's about 1 inch by 1 inch. It would fit easily into the palm of your hand while your hand is closed. This is not available on the Australian market yet, but is now being manufactured in China. We are also seeing a massive increase in the number of puffs on some of these products. So I mentioned before, the iGet Star is a 7,000. The highest we've currently got on the Australian market is about 10. There might be a 12,000 puff device available. The newest ones that are being produced out of the Shenzhen province in China are up to 25,000 puffs. So these are large devices. They contain a lot of e-liquid. And once again, single coil for the whole 25,000 puffs. So we really don't know what that's going to do. And then finally, we are also seeing a rise overseas of vapes that don't look like vapes. And we're very obviously concerned that some of these potentially might be hitting the Australian market, particularly through our black market. So there's things like key fobs, smartwatches, drink bottles and highlighters. All of these are e-cigarette products. So in conclusion, disposables are banned, but we know they're still available. They all contain nicotine. We know that the manufacturers and importers are going to alter their products to ensure that they can continue their sales on the Australian market. And then we have seen a bit of a rise in alternate nicotine-containing products like the pouches and the pearls. Just like to thank New South Wales Ministry of Health, the University of Wollongong for their research grants, and everyone else who has worked on this project with us.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Jody. Always really fascinating to hear you talk. So I've got a bunch of questions, so I'm going to jump straight into them. So the first one's from Amber, and it was back from the very start of your presentation. And she says, from what I understand, quinoline, I think I'm saying that right, has been used to treat conditions such as Alzheimer's disease. Is there a reason why this substance has been found in the analysis of vapes? Because there was a little peak on your...
There was. So that was because I didn't go into a lot of detail about what was in there. The quinoline actually isn't in the product. Quinoline is something we add. Quinoline is what we call our internal standard. We use that as our comparison point against, so quinoline structurally is very similar to nicotine. So we add it into the sample deliberately. So it's actually not in the e-cigarettes.
Excellent. Great. That answers that one. Then we've got one from Duncan. Is there any research or evidence regarding the transfer of nicotine via breast milk for vaping mothers? That's not your area, I don't think, but can you
We
speak to
don't
that?
do a lot of bodily fluid analysis, unfortunately. So yeah, I'll leave it. But I imagine it wouldn't be any different to other nicotine sources. So whether it's from smoking or vaping or anything else, the transfer process would be the same.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Great. And then one from Tracy, who's asked, now when you were talking about things that were found in the e-liquids, she's asked, is 1,3-diacetyl related to diacetyl? So I think she's asking about popcorn lung with that diacetyl.
Structurally, they're similar, but they don't interconvert. So like we said, acetone was banned because it can convert to diacetyl. The 1,3-diacetyl can't convert. But yes, it is still hitting the same receptor, which is why it still induces the same kind of flavor. That's why it's that buttery flavor. Like I said, we don't really know why they're being added. We suspect maybe like a fatty mouth feel, like giving you a mouth coating sensation or something like that.
But these ones aren't responsible for popcorn lung found from diacetyl.
And not induced popcorn lung. No.
Yeah, that's excellent. All right. Another one from Laura. Did you find any variability within the same brand with the labeling, like in the labeling and the appearance of the nicotine content or other contents? So things that are labeled the same that then have difference in them.
Yes, absolutely. Particularly nicotine concentration. There is huge variation. We can take exactly the same product, same flavor, same everything, and analyze it across, 5 different samples, and they will all have a completely different nicotine concentration. They will have slightly different variations in the flavoring molecules that are in there. There is very little consistency, particularly in the disposable products. So yes, absolutely. According to the TGO 110 says that a nicotine product needs to be within 10% of the labeled concentration. Like over 90% of the samples we've analyzed would not meet that test. So there's huge variation in everything.
And I guess that points towards where I think we're going to see this shift in the market with the new regulations coming in, that, all vapes won't be created equal sort of thing. And it will definitely be that vapes that are purchased via prescription are going to ultimately, I think, I'd be a safer product than these other ones that are unregulated. We don't know what's in them. And, like you said earlier, the manufacturing process isn't as stringent. These weird things are coming in them. So we really want people to be using regulated products sourced by a pharmacy. We had a comment from Renee Batoon about puffs and saying how in her cessation clinics, often people have realized that the number of puffs labeled is actually not what people are getting, and the battery runs out first, and maybe that's an intentional thing to get people to buy more of their products.
And once again, there isn't a lot of consistency on it. So my student at the moment who's setting up our metal study, he's also doing a lot of analysis on the number of puffs. And one of the things we actually do want to look at is exactly that, is if we sit these vaping devices on our puffing device that we have in the lab, how many puffs do we get out of a device that says 3,500? Because I know it's not going to be 3,500. They definitely do want the battery to run out first. But I guess a lot of the newer devices are rechargeable because they are getting so large now that they can't have a battery in them that is able to have the number of puffs that they require. So that will somewhat fix that problem. What it will cause, however, is people potentially using their devices when the liquid has run out, and we're getting a lot of that scorching and blackening of the coil and the cotton around that.
Yeah, and so really good piece of harm reduction advice is for people, if they start noticing that bad flavor in any way, that means the device is done.
Absolutely. Stop using it. And particularly if it's a rechargeable device, please, once they start to taste bad, stop using them.
Yeah. Another one question here from Joanne. So what's the likely, this is an interesting one actually, what's the likely expiry on disposable vapes? Like if people have stockpiled them, how long are these products viable, or are they going to go off, or the nicotine evaporate?
They don't have expiry dates on them. So I do believe one of the things for the new TGO will be that there will be expiry dates on the ones that are going to be legally sold in Australia through pharmacies. So they are going to make a decision on how long they think the shelf life of these is. So a lot of the adducts that we know are forming in there, they form fairly quickly. So that would be forming that doesn't need to sit on a shelf for 6 months for that to be forming. That's forming almost immediately. So realistically, they're fairly stable. I think the bigger issue would actually be things like if you've used them a little bit and then sit them aside, where you're then going to get things potentially like mold and bacteria that could be in there. Or if they've had poor manufacturing processes and there's mold and bacteria in there, and then they're sitting on the shelf. That's where you're potentially going to have some issues. I think the actual chemical components themselves are fairly innocuous and they would really not change. I wouldn't want to see the people picking these up after, 3 and 4 years though, and trying to use them.
Yeah, and that speaks to a bit these pod type devices where we're constantly changing the coil, the liquid reservoir and the mouthpiece and all of that being a bit more hygienic and potentially ruling out some of those issues. One from Amelia about how would you suggest we approach NRT use for people using vapes or pouches, just given the vast discrepancies in the nicotine amounts. This is probably, again, not really your area, but can you speak?
I guess it's difficult. And the biggest problem is at the moment in Australia, most of the disposable devices don't actually have a concentration on them because all of the labeling's been removed. So even if you can assume most of them want to be about 5%, which is 50 milligrams per mil, but there's actually no labels on them. And like I said, we get between 16 and 60. I have, from speaking to people who do vape, I know a lot of them say that they can tell when they pick up a product and it doesn't have enough nicotine in there. So I think probably it's difficult for prescribing, but obviously for the people utilizing these devices, they tend to know if they're ex-smokers, they'll be pretty aware of whether they have enough nicotine in there or not to be satisfying their needs.
Yeah, and if we're talking about people trying to quit and they're using NRT or pouches, I mean, my understanding is it's kind of like, obviously we want to go down the patch, combination NRT first, and we're just kind of putting it on until someone's symptoms have stopped and they seem to be being held and they're not experiencing those withdrawals. So it's a bit of a process of trial and error, I believe, to get that right.
And with the pouches, obviously avoid concentrations that cause burning. If the person is utilizing them and there's any kind of burning sensation, recommend immediately that they don't use them. I suspect that the Australian government will hopefully pick up on the pouch trend fairly soon and put something in place to at least give us some guidelines around what the labeling of the concentrations for nicotine in those products should be.
Yeah, and some regulations around them, because it sounds like even though they are a new product and we still need research on their safety, potentially these might be something that is less harmful than, breathing something into your lungs, whether it be smoking or vaping, that may help people quit because of the levels of nicotine. And importantly, it seems to be something young people like. And although we don't want them using nicotine products, if we want to get them off vaping and reduce them down, maybe it's something they'll use over NRT, although NRT would always be our first preference, most certainly, to help them quit vaping or smoking. I'm going to see if I can get one or two more here. Sorry, the questions just went berserk as we started finishing and talking. So apologies, everyone. I'll see if I can. So the only difference between the pearls and the NRT lozenges would be the nicotine dose. Is that right? Similar product then?
Similar, I guess. Yes. I get the real difference is that these aren't approved.
Yeah.
So,
no safety quality. Yeah.
That's right. So and officially, because they're not an approved product, they require a prescription for use officially in Australia.
Excellent. All right. Now, have you done any validation on the number of puffs or correlation with the volume of the liquid? Many companies on Amazon making up larger and larger numbers for their products. Is this
we haven't got specific numbers, no. We do know, like, I think some of these new products, a lot of like 16 mil containers for some of the ones that are hitting up above the sort of 15, 20,000 puffs. But no, we haven't done a direct correlation between them. And obviously in this most recent study, because all the e-cigarettes were used, most of them didn't have a lot of e-liquid in them anyway. So we actually were seeing them partway through the usage process.
All right, and just a comment. So while these are now illegal without a prescription, I've seen a number of stores in New South Wales in regional areas that are selling them. It can be confusing for clients of whether to go to a GP for a prescription. I think there's a grace period underway at the moment, isn't there? So retailers are allowed to sell off their existing stock.
Correct. I don't know when that's going to end. That was supposed to be from January. That's right. They're allowed to sell existing stock. So they have given them this slight grace period. I don't know any more information about when that's going to end. Once again,
I haven't heard that either.
They're not meant to be selling nicotine over the counter anyway.
Yes.
So what they're selling is already an illicit product. But because it's not labeled as such, then it's not obvious.
Yeah. And I'll just try for one more really quickly. So what's the likelihood of carcinogenic chemicals in the vapes leading to long-term risks? Is this still unknown?
Yes, largely. I would say, as I always do when I talk about risks associated with vaping, it's not as bad as smoking. It's worse than breathing air. And we are somewhere in that space. And we don't know exactly where we're sitting in that space. And once again, I think it depends. Not all vapes are created equal. So even classifying, saying, this is the exact harm that these are causing, we can't say that, because every single type of vape that we're looking at, these disposables that are containing these banned chemicals are going to be a lot more harmful than potentially, a pod style device that someone's changing the coil over on regularly. So yeah, we can't, there's no specific classification, but we are somewhere on that scale between air and smoke.
Excellent. And so I guess the take home there is we really want to be encouraging people, if they are going to vape, to be accessing via the legal market in Australia and getting a prescription, because at least there are some regulations around those products, and less likely that we're going to see these random things turning up in those. So that's a really important thing, to encourage people to not use from that unregulated market. It is going to be just much more unsafe products. And that's for older people and young people alike, trying to help them access a prescription. There may be some issues with that, with young people at this point accessing a prescription. My belief is that doctors will legally be able to prescribe, but I know here in Queensland, vaping products are smoking products, so will at this point currently look like it'll be illegal for a pharmacist to dispense, but they might, I'm assuming that's going to get looked at and hopefully changed at some point. I don't know if you've heard anything about that, any changes in that?
No, not yet. But like I said, the new TGA standard is meant to come out very soon. I imagine a lot of that will be up to the RACGP to make some of their decisions as well.
Yes, excellent. All right. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much, Jody. I know you're super busy, so we're really grateful that you took the time out of your schedule to present this. I know there's been lots of comments about this is great, and people wanting to use your slides, which we've got a PDF of in the chat there, and the recorded version of this webinar will be up on our website, the Insight and Dovetail websites, very soon. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for everyone joining us. Please tune in at the same time next week. We've got a webinar titled Peering into Community Care and Harm Reduction Among People Who Use Enhancement Drugs. So this will be presented by Dr. Timothy Piatowski. So hopefully we'll see you all then. And thank you again, Jody. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks, Pat.
Bye.